Great. Right. Well, everybody, thank you for those of you who have joined this evening. Purpose of the this evening is just to run through the proposed change of the club status, because obviously we're being asking people to vote at the AGM on a few motions relating to it. So I'm conscious that time at the AGM will be a bit limited. So I was hoping to be able to run through it tonight and answer some questions or queries and at least have something that people can look at. So anyway, we'll make a start. So as we know, the current position on the club is that MIRC is an unincorporated association, which basically means it is a group of individuals that are bound. Oh, hang on, the group of individuals bound together by the constitution of the club. This means that currently the club itself as an entity doesn't exist and has no legal status. The advantage is that this is the easiest, cheapest, and most informal way of operating a club like ours, and it certainly has served us generally well for the last 40 years. The only other aspect at the moment is that we're registered with HMRC as a Community Amateur Sports Club, a CASC. This brings with it a commitment to be inclusive and open to all members of the community, subject to restrictions of practicality. And it also brings certain charity type tax reliefs. Most importantly, at the moment for us, is that it's quite a sizable reduction on our council tax bill. That's briefly, that's the current situation. So obviously we are now thinking of proposing this change, and why are we suggesting it now? So it is the committee's view that it is now time to review the club's position for the following reasons. The club has built up a significant number of assets in terms of the boats and other equipment that it holds. So it's got a significant cost asset base. We have a reasonably substantial membership now of around 150 members, which is around about 100 adults and 50 odd juniors, which seems to have roughly now stabilized over the last year or so. So there's still quite a good number of people. Um,
You need to move forward.
yeah, I got. Why did I, here we go. So what does it mean in terms of? I mean, it means the club as an entity cannot enter into contracts in its own name, and this potentially exposes individual members of the committee and more generally all members of the club to a liability if the club were to be unable to pay its bills. And finally, and maybe most importantly, the club is unable to hold the lease with the MOD for its land and buildings in its own name. The lease currently has to be held by trustees who are separately responsible for ensuring its observance. And of the original four trustees who signed the lease back in 2000, only two now remain alive, and only one of these, Mervyn Warner, is a current club member. The other one, Mark Brooks, moved away some while ago. We are in contact, but he's no longer a club member. So it's fairly important that we do update and deal with the lease as soon as possible.
So Harry, quick question. Can
Yeah.
we ask questions or do we leave
Yeah. Feel free.
So what do you mean by the club cannot enter into contracts in its own name?
Basically, because the club doesn't have a legal entity, it cannot it cannot if for argument's sake, if it enters into a contract with a builder to do some work, or then the person who signs the contract is potentially liable, or the wider club as individuals, because the club itself has no legal status. It cannot actually be held liable as a club for the costs of a contract.
Okay. Got it.
So that's broadly why we're proposing the change now. It's been prompted largely by the lease, but obviously the other aspect, particularly the liability of the membership, is an important consideration. So the advantages of becoming a charitable incorporated organisation, as opposed to any other legal incorporation. The committee, or I with Mike at the time, we had a meeting with Braciers, and the question of the club status came up, and they advised that this CIO status would be the best way forward for us. It's it's a fairly recent method of incorporating. A significant number of other rowing clubs, both large and small around the country, have already set themselves up as CIOs. And some of the local ones, like our Gravesend, have done it. London Otters did it last year. Spitfire did it last year. Those are some of the local ones. So obviously I've had talks with them. And so the perceived benefits from becoming a CIO will be that it is a form of incorporation with limited liability. So there would in fact be no liability for the members, the broader members, and the officers of the club who are not trustees. Charitable status brings certain tax reliefs, including the same reduction on council tax that we already enjoy through CASC, and potentially possibility of relief on VAT for construction work. And it would also mean that the club can hold the lease with the MOD in its own name. So there'll be no need for separate trustees for the lease. And potentially in future, it would be able to own the land if an agreement could ever be reached with the MOD to obtain the land outright. So what is a CIO? As I said, a charitable incorporated organisation, it's a relatively new structure which was brought in by the Charity Commission in 2017, and it was aimed really at allowing volunteer-run clubs, smaller organisations like ourselves, to incorporate and gain charitable status. So the charity would be registered with the Charity Commission rather than Companies House, as will be the case with a normal limited company. The charity, just like a limited company, has to send an annual report and its accounts to the Charity Commission at the end of each financial year. But one of the differences with the charity is that late reporting does not seem to be a particularly awkward matter. If you're late reporting with Companies House, you get fined. But as far as I can work out, and there's quite a lot of late reporting goes on with charities, there isn't so much comeback with a charity. So the CIO, the charity, has a governing document, what's called its constitution, which includes the charity's objectives and how the governance of the charity operates. And broadly, the charity is overseen by trustees who are elected by the members, who are responsible for ensuring that the charity is run in line with its objects, that it is financially well run, that it sends its annual report to the Charity Commission. So it does what it does do is it puts if you like, another level of governance in place into the club, whereas at the moment the management committee obviously run the club and do everything. The idea is with this structure is that there are trustees, some of whom may also be on the management committee, who sit above the management committee as the ultimate responsibility for ensuring that it fulfills its charitable objectives. So how will the new club operate? Well, the short answer is that members on the ground should notice very little, if any, change. The idea is that the trustees will delegate day-to-day power to the management committee to run the club in very much the same way as it does at the moment. So the constitution, the governing document for the CIO, specifically allows trustees to do that, to delegate power to a separate committee. The only stipulation being that at least one member of that committee must be a trustee. The way that we've approached it, having discussed it with several other clubs and seen what they've done, is that we anticipate initially having 5 trustees, with the constitution allowing for a maximum of 6 and a minimum of 3. 1/3 of the trustee positions would be up for election at every AGM. So with that number of trustees, no trustee should be being asked to serve more than the maximum of 3 years without having to stand for re-election or to make way for a new person. A trustee, though, just as an addition, a trustee can resign at any time. And there's no legal bar to doing that. There's no legal process to go through. The trustee just has to tender their resignation. So there will be an AGM, just like now, which will elect the officers to the management committee as well as the trustees. It'll receive reports, accept the accounts, and agree the following year's budget in exactly the same way as we do now. So broadly, if you're a member of the club, or you should see really no difference apart from electing trustees as well as management committee at the AGM. There would be no difference. So just to go into the governance of the CIO with a bit more depth. So as I mentioned, the CIO has a governing document, which is also called the Constitution, which sets down the way that the charity is to be run. In the Constitution, you have to state what the object of the charity is. And broadly, we've lifted that from the current Constitution. So the object of the charity would be, so the objects of the CIO are to provide facilities for and to promote and encourage the sport of rowing for the benefit of members of the community on the River Medway at Maidstone. It's a good idea to keep the object fairly tight, because obviously we need to ensure that the club follows it, and we can report that it's been following its object throughout the year. So we don't want too much detail, extraneous detail put into the object. As far as the rest of the wording of the Constitution goes, it's broadly laid down by the Charity Commission, and we can only tailor it to our own needs in certain ways, such as how many trustees we have and how long they serve. If you vary their constitution too much, it can cause difficulties in registering the charity. But what the constitution allows for is for the creation of rules and bylaws for the charity, which sit below the constitution but are still binding upon the members. So since the constitution does not include important elements of the club's current constitution, which set out how the club operates, we've come up with these new bylaws, which broadly are the existing constitution. This is the route that most other CIO rowing clubs have gone down, like Otters and Spitfire. So the bylaws can add further things in. So the bylaws include a further object of the club being to promote sporting behaviour and friendship, which is the other part of the object in our current constitution. But we've left it out of the main object in the actual constitution itself. But we wanted to keep that in the bylaws as it's something we do think is important.
What is the binding of the bylaws? It's just an agreement between the club, is it? Or
basically the trustees can the CIO can have separate rules and bylaws, call them what you like, to the constitution as to how the club is run. Again, they're voted on by the members at the AGM. So it's just like the club rules now. And they are binding on the members by dint of the fact that they have been voted on by the AGM. So they obviously can't conflict with anything in the Constitution, but as long as they are additional to and specific to the running of the club, then you can basically put in the bylaws things like, who the members of the management committee are, what the roles are. I mean, what roles should be elected. The fact that we have to have a rowing safety advisor, a welfare officer, and that obviously we've got certain British rowing things that have to go in there as well. So by putting those in the bylaws, you can avoid having to tinker too much with the Constitution.
Thank you.
So trustees, as I mentioned, the charity has to have trustees, and various clubs have gone down various different routes with how they work the trustees. Someone like Gravesend has made their whole committee trustees, who are obviously re-elected annually, just like the management committee is at the moment. Other clubs have gone down the route of making their trustees completely independent and having just a trustee sit on the management committee. And others have gone down the route of having at least one of the sort of principal officers, if not more, a compulsory trustee, so that there's a direct link between the trustees and the management committee. At the moment, we've gone down the route of not making the whole committee trustees, because we felt that that would be not really fair to ask all committee members to become trustees, because obviously the trustees do have some responsibilities and liabilities over and above, and we felt it would discourage perhaps people from stepping forward, particularly for some of the non-principal positions. So we've gone down the route at the moment that the chair of the management committee has to be a trustee. And obviously, if another person on the committee wishes to be a trustee, then that's absolutely fine. But as a minimum, the chair has to be. So that there is so that decisions taken by the management committee hopefully are in line with the views of the trustees. So we've currently set out that the MIRC must have a minimum of 3 trustees and a maximum of 6. The minimum of 3 was purely to ensure that there's more than, obviously having 2 is not ideal, so a minimum of 3, and we don't want too many, so a maximum of 6. And as I mentioned, there's a stipulation in the bylaws that the chair of the management committee must be a trustee. I mean, there is a potential issue with putting another layer of governance in, whereby you get, obviously, the management committee making decisions on a day-to-day basis, using their delegated powers, and conceivably the trustees might disagree with it. So there is potentially that issue to be dealt with in future, but in reality, I don't see that being a particular problem. We can change the bylaws and the constitution at each AGM. So if we did find that we wanted to tweak it, then things aren't set in stone, and we can make changes as we go forward.
I guess the committee could decide to spend a lot of money and make I mean, that's the worry. They could spend a load of money and then it will be up to the trustees to stop them doing that, really, wouldn't it?
Well, it would. I mean, it would be an extreme case, I think. But I mean,
Yes.
I don't see decisions on a boat spend in a given year, or buying new ergos, things like that. I don't see that being an issue, because it's all part and parcel of the running of the club.
Yes.
I mean, where the only potential issue I could see was if there was a decision by the management committee to do a major thing, which for some reason the trustees were either at odds with or felt it wasn't within the object of the charity, and so there would have to then be presumably dialogue, and the situation would need to be resolved. But and a club of our size, I don't see it probably being an issue, but potentially it could be. The way the trustees work is because obviously they're elected at the AGM, but you have to apply to the Charity Commission and submit your constitution before you can obviously have an AGM because the company doesn't exist at that point. Charity doesn't exist. So in the constitution, the first trustees of the club are named, and then they become the first trustees, and then obviously the re-election kicks in at the first AGM. So currently, I've approached some of the great and the good to be trustees. So Richard, as the nominee for the chair of the management committee, would obviously have to be a trustee. And then I've also asked Robin Chapman, Sue Mobbs, Mike Strachan, and I felt I really ought to put my name into the hat as the other ones. So that would give us 5. I mean, we could have 6 or we could have one less, but I'm currently, thank you very much to all those who've said yes. Those are the 5 that we are proposing to put in the Constitution when we make the application at some point next year. So just a little bit of background. So we would need a report to the Charity Commission. So at the end of each financial year, the trustees must submit a report on the year to the Charity Commission with a set of accounts. And the Charity Commission have their own sort of form for the accounts, which I talked to Duncan about at obviously our accountants who do the club accounts, DSB accounting, and he's actually dropped this year's figures into the document. So apparently it's all very straightforward, no issues. So that would be the presentation of the accounts to the Charity Commission. And the other thing you need to send is a report by the trustees, which is effectively like the chairman's report, chair's report, if you like. And there is a form template that one can use if you don't want to do a separate. I mean, some clubs use a template, some clubs don't. But basically, you're just saying, you repeat what the objects of the club are. You report on sort of what it's done in the year in terms of hopefully furthering the object. For instance, if you had a learn to row course, you could put that. Or if you purchased equipment specifically aimed at certain people, you could put that. So all these kind of things just to put in there. To be honest, I suspect they don't look at it very hard, but it has to be done and it is a requirement. So so that is basically what the CIO is, why we want to do it, and why we think now is the time. So in terms of how it will happen, is that the plan is for the management committee to ask the 2025 AGM, obviously we've sent out the notice of the motions, to give consent to apply to the Charity Commission to set the CIO up, and also to agree the draft constitution. We've also asked it to agree the draft bylaws, but those that don't actually form part of the application to the Charity Commission. So that's one thing. We get past the AGM, and if the members pass it, then we are able at some point then to apply to the Charity Commission to set the new charity up. So the other aspect is that the Braciers is currently corresponding with the MOD to confirm the reassignment of the lease to the new club entity. What needs to happen is that the current lease, as I explained, is held in the name of trustees, and they effectively are the people that hold the lease with the MOD. It's not the club. So what has to happen, there has to be a legal process to basically approach the remaining trustees, confirm they're happy for the lease to be reassigned, and then for the MOD to reassign the lease to the new charity. I mean, we've had correspondence with them. I've corresponded with the guy at the MOD, and I've got confirmation in writing that they're happy for it to go ahead. But obviously, we need legal certainty that that's going to happen. One thing we do not want to do is jeopardize the lease with the MOD. So we have to make sure that's watertight before we move any further forward.
Harry,
Yeah.
sorry, is there any difference in costs to the club by becoming CIO?
No, there is no cost. There's no ongoing running cost to the club of becoming a CIO. So there is obviously a cost to us in terms of getting it set up, but either way, we need to deal with the lease. So the two ways we can deal with the lease now is we either find some new people to be trustees on the lease and we get the lease redrawn with the new trustee names, or we get it reassigned to the new entity. Either way, the legal cost of doing that is similar. As far as Braces is concerned, we've asked them to provide us with assistance in making sure that the motions, the resolutions that we put to members are correctly worded and the minutes are correct for the setting up of the CIO. But we haven't actually asked them to be part of the application process, and they haven't been involved in the drafting of the constitution because we've been able to talk to quite a lot of other clubs about it, and I don't think, to be honest, that they could do a better job than we could. So, but in terms of the ongoing costs, no, there's no other costs that we will incur on an ongoing basis as a charity. Not that I'm aware of. Anyway, I haven't found anything as yet.
And there's also the other question I had was, does this impact when we apply for grants or we're trying to get money from other people? Presumably, because you're a charity, it makes that easier.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't like to say categorically yes or no to that, but yes, broadly, that is also one of the reasons that other clubs have moved to CIO status, is that it does make it easier, I understand, to approach people for grants. Because obviously, if you are a charity, then with stated objects that are charitable, then it does make it easier getting grants. But obviously, we haven't any experience of that. But that is the anecdotal evidence that I've got.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so just on that, Harry, so like my company, you get allocated a certain number of volunteering hours, which can then be allocated to a charity. So I mean, personally, I will donate £500 a year to the club, and it's going to like release things like that. You know, if companies
Yeah.
like mine can do it, I'm sure there'll be other people. So I think it will open up,
Hopefully,
you know,
yes. Thank you,
that.
Joe. I mean, in fact, one of the senior women, I think, at the AGM said that her father runs a charity which dishes out cash and has to go to charities. So, you know, once we're a charity, we can have a look at maybe accessing something from that. So yes, hopefully, charitable status will also open some doors in terms of that kind of thing. Yeah, so as I was saying, once we know for sure that the lease is heading in the right direction, then we'll make our application to the Charities Commission, which you can do online. So we have to go through an online process to do that. Approval apparently should take 2 months, but having talked to Walbrook, who put their application in last year, I think they are currently on about 5 months wait. So I think it obviously can be longer depending on how many people they've got, how many charities they've got in the queue. So anyway, so that's the plan. So we get the AGM to approve the fact that we can set the new charity up, to approve the constitution, and then we apply. And then once the new charity is set up, we then will need to call a special general meeting, an EGM of the club, to ask members to approve the wind up of the existing club and the transfer of its assets and liabilities, if it has any, to the new charity. Now, because we're a cask club, we have to be a little bit careful about doing that, because HMRC insists that once you become a cask club, if you do wind up, then all your assets have to be transferred either to another cask entity or to a charity, fortunately. The other thing that we need to just ask the AGM to do is approve a change to our current constitution about winding up the club, because there's no provision at the moment in the current constitution to wind up the club. If we do, so that we can wind the club up, but the assets have to go to a rowing body. It was the Southeast Rowing Council, which no longer exists. So we just need to change the wording of our winding up clause, which we've put as one of the motions. So that's the timescale. So I mean, to a degree, it's dictated by the legal work on the lease. I'm hoping that we can push that through. I mean, the MOD are not going to be quick because they've got no reason to be, but I'm hoping that we can sort something out over the next month or two, and then we can apply. And so, with the best will in the world, I can't see the EGM happening until at least late spring, summer of next year, maybe a bit later, but at least we can get the ball rolling. So that's it as far as that's concerned. Let me just end sharing. Stop share. So hopefully that's given you a brief summary of where we are and what the proposal is. I mean, there may still be a few tweaks along the line in terms of the constitution and things, but broadly, I think we are there. So I've opened the floor. Obviously, we've had a few questions as we go, but has anybody got any questions or comments? No, no.
I think you said that we might save on VAT on any construction as well.
Yes, I mean, I looked up what about the question of VAT, and it's fairly restrictive on what you can get VAT relief on as a charity. I mean, if you're buying an ambulance or a fire engine, you're okay, but can't see us doing much of that. So unfortunately, buying equipment, it wouldn't apply. So we'd still be paying VAT on equipment. But the one area that it does say that you can apply to, you have to apply for an exemption voucher, is on construction. But I don't know quite how broad that definition is, whether, for an instance, on the clubhouse development refurbishment that we're sort of looking into at the moment, whether that would apply as as it's not a new build. I don't know, but yeah, potentially it is there, and it's something that we should look into. So obviously, once we get all the costings and things on the clubhouse, we might consider it worthwhile delaying things until the charity is in place, or at least certainly investigating properly as to whether we could get relief, because if we could, then obviously it would be worth a significant sum.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely worth looking into before we press the button on any work. Anybody else?
I think just to say thank you to you for all the work you've obviously done here, because you've read lots of documents, I think.
Yes, yeah, I have.
Summarized it very, yeah.
It has actually been quite interesting, and it's been good to talk to. I mean, fortunately, with my umpiring hat on, I do know quite a lot of people from other clubs who are trustees of other clubs. So I've been able to have chats with quite a few people who I know very well, and that has given me a lot of insight into what we need to do. So that's been very helpful. But yeah, it's actually been quite interesting. So it'll be good to see it through to fruition if we get that far. Good.
What's left to be done with the army, Harry, in terms of having a conversation with them? Have you got a planned meeting with them?
What, with the army in terms of the lease?
Yeah.
No, I think getting a meeting with them is not possible these days because they all live at arm's length. But we found the person after a great deal of effort. We found somebody at the MOD to correspond to, because all of their offices that we used to deal with in the local area are shut down. So anyway, we finally found someone to communicate with, and he, I don't think our lease was even on the radar, as you might imagine. But I think he went away and looked it up and came back and said, yes, yeah, that's fine. So we do at least have a point of contact. And it's actually a point of contact that Bill Butler at Bracious put me onto. So that was quite helpful. So all we can do now, to be honest, is keep pushing Bracious to liaise with him and get to the stage where we have a document in writing to confirm that the reassignment of the lease will be fine. I mean, we don't actually, in theory, have to have it done by the time we set the new CAO up and wind up the existing club, because the lease is held by the separate trustees and the club doesn't hold it itself. It actually, the fact that the current club is wound up actually doesn't matter. But obviously, we want to make sure that everything is watertight before we go down that route. So we do really want to make sure that the MOD are on side and that we've got some legal document to say that they will reassign the lease before we go too far.
Okay. I can just see that being something that will stall the process quite.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but we are in their hands really. So I've mind you, Bracious are just as bad. I emailed them last week and said, how are you getting on? And obviously I've not heard a dicky bird, so I'm going to have to chase them up again, hopefully before next Thursday, to try and find out what the position is. But these things take time. But I mean, obviously the slight concern is that we were down to the last two trustees on the lease at the moment. I mean, Mark is, unless he gets hit by a bus, he's absolutely fine. Mervyn, obviously, we know is an elderly gentleman, so we just need to press on with it. So, anything else? Okay, well, that's great. Thank you very much for joining me. It was good of you to come, and I will cease the recording now, and then I will be able to put this up, hopefully on a link, which I'll send out so other people can see it should they choose to. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.